Howdy folks, welcome to In the Beginning, where we look at setting up technical equipment for beginners, looking at video production, photography and audio production. So today we're going to be looking at how to set up our Canon 700D for use in video. So often my students go out and shoot interviews with people or set up elaborate shoots and then come back and view their footage only to find that it's almost unusable, which is really unfortunate just because they didn't take that little bit of time to actually set up their camera first. So hopefully this video will help you learn how to set it up early on, and then you'll be able to set it up from there on out. First thing we're looking at doing is make sure that we turn it on to video, which is the off, on, and then the little camera setting. Pretty basic. This is for beginners. Next thing you want to do is make sure it is on manual. Without it being on manual, you're not going to see the settings that we need to look at and make sure that we're adjusting correctly. Okay, so we've got it turned on, we've got it on manual. The next thing we want to do is click into menu, and you'll see that there's a whole bunch of options here. We're really only looking at a couple. So you can see that there's 1, 2, 3 camera settings. The next one is for video. And then we're looking at the second video. So you should see movie rec size, sound recording, and video snapshot. Now all we're looking at is that top one, movie rec size. So what this does is enable us to choose both the resolution size and the frames per second. So that small number is the frames per second. We've got 1920 by 1080. At 25 frames a second and at 24 frames a second. For our purposes, 25 or 24, essentially the same thing. I realise that there are differences, but at the beginning level, the difference is not so great that we need to worry about it. The important thing is that if we are going to edit this, we need to make sure that whatever setting we have it on, that it's a setting in our video editing software project. They need to line up. That is very, very important. So I'm going to set it at 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames a second, and that will become more important later on when we look at the shutter speed setting. Now, the other option is 1280 by 50, and that is 50 frames per second. It is lesser resolution, but 50 frames per second, we've got twice as many frames per second, so it's taking twice as many photos, which is basically film is, or video is a series of photos, so we're looking at twice as many photos per second. So if we want to slow it down and do slow-mo, we want to be shooting in 50 frames a second so that you will have twice as many photos per second even when we slow it down. So we can slow it down by half and it will look just as smooth as 24 or 25 frames per second. So we'll set that, get out of there and press menu. Really that's the only setting we're looking at today. Takes us back to the main screen here, which gives us all of the controls. So that first number there, that 50, that's the important one. We're shooting at 24 frames per second, so we want that number to be 50. You want it to be double what your frames per second is. Okay, so the 50 refers to the shutter speed. So the shutter opens and closes in 1/50th of a second. Okay, so if we were shooting at 50 frames per second, we would want this shutter speed number to be 100. Okay, so just remember, the numbers you need to remember are whatever frames per second you have chosen, the shutter speed should be twice that amount. 24 frames a second or 25 frames a second, a shutter speed of 50. Okay, so we've got that set. Of course we can experiment with this a little bit if we wanted to. If we're shooting an action sequence and there's a chase scene and we want to make it feel really gritty, you can shoot at a higher shutter speed. So you might shoot 24 frames a second, but you might put the shutter speed at 100 or 200 and just see what the results are. But I would experiment before you go on your shoot to decide what your settings are going to be. It's really important to experiment before you go on the shoot. You need to know what the settings are going to be. Okay, so we've chosen 50, we get out of there. The next number is the aperture, and so if you want that shallow depth of field, we'll be looking at that in a different tutorial, at setting your shallow depth of field, your aperture, and getting that focus pull. So you can set that, refer to the other video. And then the ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor inside the camera. So if you are shooting outside, for example, and you have the ISO set on auto, and it's a nice sunny day, you've got it set on 100, and then the clouds come across, the ISO is going to automatically adjust to a higher ISO, and you'll get that dimming and then getting bright again because the ISO is trying to adjust. You're much better off setting it on one ISO, a number, 100, 200, whatever is appropriate for the moment, and then it will stay at that sensitivity rather than it shifting while you're shooting. So I've got mine set at 200 because of the lighting kit that we have here, and basically we're ready to go. So I hope you learned something from this setup. Please use it. It is always worth setting up your camera before you go out and shoot.